With me is Anneka Gupta, Shirley Lin, Briana Ings, and Annie Pearl. The four of us had this amazing conversation last month about careers and career transitions. And as we move towards thinking through how to have a happy and fulfilled career, we talk about how to have a happy and fulfilled life. And that's what really today is all about. So maybe I'll start with you, Anneka. Would you mind introducing yourself, but not as much around what you do at work, but like introduce us to you and your life. What do you kind of have to fit into the box of your day and your week, and how do you get through it?
I would phrase it not as what do I have to fit into the box of my life, but what do I want to fit into the box of my life? Because I'm definitely a person that chronically oversubscribes myself to things, but I actually really like that. So my life right now, so I knew this quarter was going to be a really busy quarter for me. I'm currently the chief product officer at Rubik. We're going through our annual planning. We just finished our fiscal year. So that's what's going on at work. Obviously, there's this whole macroeconomic landscape that we're all managing through as leaders. But then outside of work, I have an 8-month-old baby, my first, and he's starting to get ready to crawl. He's not quite there yet. And that's been just amazing to watch and see his curiosity. I'm teaching a class 3 days a week at Stanford. I do a bunch of advising and mentoring as well on the side. And I try to spend time with my husband, my family. My mom lives 10 minutes away. My friends in the Bay Area. Try to do all of these things and fit it into 24 hours in a day. And I joke very often with my coworkers that I wish there were 36 hours in a day instead of 24 hours in a day, so I could fit it all in even more.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to hear your tips and tricks, because I think those of us who are doing half as much as what you are doing are still struggling. And so, Brianna, I'd love to hear kind of what's in your life. What are you trying to kind of connect and balance?
Yeah, I don't know if I want to follow Anneka on that one. But so I'm the head of product at ClickUp. So the big thing that we're working on is launching an entirely new version of our product. And so that's eating up a huge chunk of my time at work. But then at home, I'm also a new mom. I'm a little bit behind Anneka. So I have about 4-month-old daughter. And so the big thing for me is figuring out my new normal. So I really want to prioritize spending time with my daughter, my husband. We used to have dinner together every night. Like, I want to maintain that. A lot of my friends are distributed and not in San Diego where I live. And so I want to prioritize being able to travel and see them. But struggling with the guilt around doing that if I'm already not with my daughter as much when I'm at work. And then there's just some health issues that family around me are going through. And so trying to be there and supportive for them. So yeah, just trying to establish the new normal where I can both apply myself how I always have at work, but really prioritize and be present in my home life, which is really important to me right now.
Yeah, and I think that comment of, both what you're trying to keep in balance has shifted over the years, and then the idea that you're constantly reprioritizing, but constantly trying to find that new North Star, I think is probably common between all the listeners here. Not all of our listeners are going to have exactly the same demands on their time. Some of them are going to be earlier and not with family. Some of them are going to be a little later stage and have older kids, or perhaps even empty nesters. But I think all of us are in this journey of trying to figure out how to devote time for the things that give them great joy. And that's, I think, as we both have heard on these two stories, this tricky problem. Shirley, how do you feel you're doing in trying to find time for joy?
I think the short answer is it depends on the week. My husband and I, so my husband has a big job. I'm so proud of him. But, every week we sit down and look at our calendar, and we are the ultimate maximizers. We're trying to figure out how he fits in work travel and I fit in a board meeting. And does it work with our nanny's schedule if, folks have to stay at work late a couple nights? And so we're just trying to find a rhythm, every week, it seems like. And so I think on the personal joy perspective, my husband and I try to make sure we're connecting, but we confess there are some nights where we kind of stand at the kitchen counter and we're eating a dinner of salami, cheese, and a glass of wine, and we're saying like, that's pretty good enough. We at least get to chat with each other and have a conversation before we log on again or collapse into bed exhausted. So, I would say we're just taking it day by day, and some weeks are better than others, but I think as long as we can laugh about it and joke about how chaotic life is sometimes, I think we kind of zoom out and feel pretty grateful that we've got such great family around us. We've got a 4-year-old daughter and an almost 9-month-old son. And, I think it's supposed to be crazy just a little bit, right?
It is supposed to be crazy a bit. And we will talk about how crazy it needs to be and how much crazy is up to you. But Annie, when you've been a product executive for a long time now, do you think being a product manager helps you kind of keep things in check and maximize your time?
I do, actually. I think one of the things I was thinking about in preparation for this conversation was, what are the kind of things I do, the rituals? And I do a lot of what I'll just call kind of roadmap planning, right? Which is to say, over the next 3 months, what are the things that I kind of want to get done, both in my personal life and my professional life? And then I sort of have, monthly, weekly, and sometimes daily check-ins of how am I doing the things that I want to be doing? Am I balancing? And the word balance, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about, how real can you ever really balance? But am I constantly kind of putting myself in check to make sure that the things that I want to prioritize, both professionally and personally, are getting done along the timeline that they need to get done in order to meet my goals. So I do think having that background in product management of sort of being able to figure out where do you want to be and, at some sort of time period and working back from that to make sure you're sort of measuring progress day to day has come in some handy.
Maybe just to sort of jump right into it, I think a lot of our listeners are working for people like yourselves, and they see these executives and they get this sort of glimpse of them in balance, making sure that they are calm, keeping the sort of planet together, trying to make sure that things do not spin off out of orbit. And I think that gives a lot of our listeners a complex that it's like, look, I feel like underneath, that sort of, I'm barely treading water, and I see these folks, it seems like they have so much more. Give me an example in maybe the last few weeks of like a story that you could share where, things are not quite as they seem, and that, people might see one angle of maybe how you appear in a meeting, but in reality, it is a little bit more nutty, and you have more connection with crazy than maybe people kind of come to believe. I'll leave it for the group. Any takers on like the crazy, like who can out crazy each other, right, is kind of the question.
I'm happy to share a fun story from earlier this week. Our nanny was out sick, and I had my husband was traveling, and I had kind of back-to-back calls all day long, many of which couldn't be moved. My son had soccer practice, and I have a 1-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And so I took him to soccer practice, and mind you, he's 3. So when I say soccer practice, I'm holding his hand, helping him do the little drills across the soccer field. I had my 1-year-old daughter strapped to my chest. I'm holding his hand while he's doing soccer drills, and I was on a call, a work call. And the reality was my daughter had no shoes on. Her feet were probably freezing. My son was crying half the time because he didn't really want to be at soccer practice. And, I was mostly just listening in on the phone call and not as active as a participant as I would have hoped. So, I think behind what may appear to be we have it all worked out, I think we're always juggling lots of different things. And in those moments we're, sort of just trying to get by and do the best we can for both our colleagues, our children, and ourselves. So that was a bit of the moment this week where I was like, if someone could see me right now, they'd probably laugh at how comical this is.
I had a version of that, but with a younger child, where my husband was out and not able to help. And I had an all hands that I had to be on. I had to pump. I had to watch our baby do tummy time on a mat that's like Anneka's behind her, and eat breakfast so that I didn't lose my mind and be hangry all day. And so I'm sitting on the couch trying to have the camera above where I'm pumping, watch my daughter, make sure she's okay. And I was like, all right, how can I come off as normal on this call?
A lot of the notes that I've heard so far has to do with sort of support, and we touched a little bit about this last time we chatted, that, it sort of so-called takes a village, but, that, a lot of folks that are listening may not quite have that degree of support, or they may have challenges, financial or time-wise or health-wise, that prevent them from taking on all of these different responsibilities. I'm curious, as you've been able to sort of succeed in these sort of balancing acts of, a high wire balancing act, I would call it. What's your support structure like, and how important maybe was it in the calculus of what you decided to take on as leaders?
For me, it's absolutely critical. I couldn't do half of what I was doing without the support structures around me. So to give you a picture of what that looks like, my husband isn't working, so he's able to take care of our son full time. And if I have to work late, I don't have to try to schedule with a nanny and figure out what's going on, because I know he's going to be there. My mom lives 10 minutes away from us, so she can also pop by anytime, and she's retired, so she has a lot of freedom to help us out. I have tons of family and friends in the area as well, so we get a lot of other support through that network. And without that, I honestly don't know what I would do. I look at a lot of people around me, and they don't have that. They have, like Shirley, I have two working parents in a house, and that. Honestly, it's like I probably would cut back on what I was doing, especially all of the professional extracurriculars that I do. I wouldn't do those if I didn't have the support system around me. I would have to spend more time on work and less time on other kinds of activities.
This might be one of the first and more critical lessons that we talk through, is that in some ways, everyone sort of at a certain stage of success and career has opportunities to do all of these exploits, both personally and professionally. But in some ways, it's a gift versus a right. And it's a gift based on how perhaps your life has, afforded you resources, whether those are financial, whether those are your health. I mean, I coach a lot of folks who struggle with health and they can't take the big job. Or folks that don't have the support. Single mom, for example, who's a great executive, can't take the CPO role, though she's qualified for it. And I think that maybe my question is, have you ever been in a situation, any of you, where you've really had to hold back professionally on maybe the biggest job at the best company or the best opportunity, because you were trying to be thoughtful around how you structure your time and how you make sure that you can support all of your endeavors?
Well, I guess thinking back to when I was still at Airbnb, I definitely, my last kind of role there, I was really calculated in what team I joined, because we were preparing to have our first child at that time. My husband and I met in business school. We both met and kind of were a good match because we're both ambitious and career oriented. But at that time, he had a demanding job with travel. And so, I think at that moment, we talked and we said, hey, I think it makes sense, for me at Airbnb to take a different role than I probably would have, to make sure that, I had the capacity to help us navigate our first child together. And, I don't think I thought of it as a step back in my career per se, but I do think we were really intentional and realistic about, I think, some of the time limitations, and I think the emotional capacity we needed to become parents together for the first time. And so I do think having a really honest conversation about what the family unit needs and also can support is so critical to happiness in life as you're trying to figure out how to balance it all.
Yeah, and I feel like pacing is huge in this whole equation. And what I mean by that is, I think we want all the things all at once. And the moment that it's almost like you get to this moment where you can get the job and you have the opportunity to have kids and you have the opportunity with capital to travel and explore things, and you have more friends than you've had in the past, and your parents and you are building this relationship as adults and they want to be engaged in your life, and there's like a million demands on time. And what I think that people forget is that you have time to sequence joy, and that it's okay if you lose the battle, win the war. It's okay if you, for example, maybe hold back. If people have kids, they disappear from their friends. And, maybe that's okay. Your real friends will be there and people will understand. Maybe you take a smaller job because you want to support your husband, or your husband wants to support his partner. I think that generally speaking, when you pace yourself, you can manage through some of these stresses. It's when you take on all of it at the same time with the idea that, oh, well, this may not ever happen again, you fail, you lose confidence, you lose energy. I think that's what spins people out of control.
Well, I think the theme of this is pretty clear to me, that it's really work-life prioritization versus work-life balance. I think that balance is a complete myth. You are never going to find a balanced solution. There's going to be times when you prioritize work and you're all in on work and you're traveling. And there's going to be times when you're all in on home and you tell your work that you're not going to be responsive. And then, sometimes maybe you have a mix of those, but it's all about prioritizing what makes sense. And really proactively communicating that on both sides. I think Shirley was talking about her planning, and Annie, her planning. It's all about, telling your husband you're going to be late because you're working late. I don't always do that. Sorry, Scott. Very understanding. And telling work that you're not going to answer questions right away. So all about communication, and it's really about prioritization.
I joke sometimes that, when my husband and I are communicating and we're planning a busy week, that might involve being really snippy with each other and saying, oh my gosh, you have another work dinner? What about, my work event, so and so? And it's just hard. I think real talk here for a second is you're both trying to support each other and be amazing parents and also do an A+ job at work. And it's just tough to fit it all in. And I think that's what we probably don't hear enough narrative around, is just that no matter how much you're skilled at multitasking and prioritizing everything in your life, there's going to be those moments where it's just really hard. And that's okay. I think that's normal, and that's part of this journey.
There's a speech that Shonda Rhimes gave at like a graduation, and she was talking about, being a parent and a working parent. And she said, people ask me all the time, how do I do it? And she said, the answer is, I don't, right? Whenever you see me succeeding at one part of my life, most certainly means I'm failing in another part of my life. If I'm killing it at work, I'm probably missing, bath and story time. Or if I'm at home, doing something for the kid, then I'm probably blowing off work in some way, right? And so I think it's just really healthy to just say, to the point of prioritization, and it's not about balance, because the reality is, balance is sort of this myth, and the reality is, at sometimes you're going to be doing better at one part of your life, and at other times the other, and just being comfortable with that, and acknowledging, and maybe being really clear with yourself on when you start to feel the imbalance, checking in with yourself to figure out how do you rebalance it into a way that makes sense for you.
I think it's a really great point, because we're all very type A and we all want to do the best in everything all the time. And I think there's no magic bullet, or there's no silver bullet in all of this. It's just going to be hard, and some things are going to drop, and you have to be okay with that. And I think a lot of it is just like all of us have like come to terms with things are going to drop. Not everything's going to be perfect. And that's just the way it is. And that's the way that we have to live our lives. Because if we try to make everything perfect and we try to be perfect at everything, there just really isn't enough time to do that.
Where does gender kind of fit into this conversation? As a mom, do you feel additional pressure? Do you feel like your company or society or your parents, or perhaps your kids or even your partner kind of has different expectations of you? Or that if you were a guy and you were doing the exact same thing, things would be harder or easier. I think it's a really hard conversation to have without talking about gender, because my impression is that my balance and how I manage things, people react differently than when I've heard how they react to the folks that I coach that are female. And what a unique opportunity to get it from the sources. So what's your honest take on this?
I think there's kind of two dimensions, and I'm going to make lots of generalizations. So I'll start with that. I think the first is support at home, and we've talked a little bit about this already. But many men who have kind of crazy demands on their time, do have someone at home, a wife, mother, who's making sure all that hard work that's happening at home is taken care of. And in this situation, we have two women here who have amazing husbands who are doing that. Many women with crazy demands on their time, have a husband and father who's also hard at work. And so there is that same kind of level of support at home, but they're still expected to play kind of an outsized role on the home front. And so I think this dynamic, if you are two working parents, that leads to sort of differences in terms of how men and women often end up sort of managing the crazy demands on their time. So I think that's one element. I think the second is what I'll call the invisible work. Not all, but many moms that I talk to, I'd be curious to hear the folks on the phone deal with a fair amount of kind of invisible work, right? When it comes to the kids, this is things like making sure the doctor's appointments are set, the diapers are ordered, the summer classes are all signed up for in January, right? And so even when you have an incredibly supportive partner who's highly engaged in your children, deeply invested, I think women still carry this burden of invisible work, that we're always kind of thinking about things that we have to be, another checklist of things we have to be doing, just to kind of keep the trains on the track at home. So lots of generalizations in there, but I think there are, two dimensions, one around how much support you have at home and if you're both working parents or not. And then secondly, the kind of invisible work behind the scenes, but would love to hear others' thoughts on that.
I agree with that. Another thing that I found, just because I'm a new mom still, coming back from maternity leave, like I'd worked with a lot of peers who'd come back from paternity leave, and I'd worked with some peers that had come back from maternity leave. And the thing that was really challenging for me is like I was still breastfeeding. And so actually trying to figure out how to make time in the day to pump or breastfeed while also coming back to work. And also doing some work travel. I had to travel for a week to India for work with the rest of our leadership team. I didn't want to stop breastfeeding. So I pumped for an entire week, and trying to do that while you're like jet lagged. I was like getting to my hotel room late at night, having to get up early in the morning, and fit all of that in was really challenging. And it made me really appreciate working moms so much more, because I was like, that's not something that any of my male peers ever had to go through while also returning to work.
100%. I've been there, and it is stressful to just think like the amount of logistics you have to handle. Like, oh my God, how am I will there be a freezer? Can I bring ice on the plane? Like, oh my gosh, just the amount of logistics go out of control. To me, I think the real thing that's challenging is the amount of parental leave you take. At every company I've been at, men tended to take just like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And I did not want to do that. And two, because of the physical dynamics of being a mom and needing to breastfeed, it is literally impossible to take less than 6 weeks. And that makes it really hard, because then, you feel like people look at you and it's, oh, she's taking 3-4 months off, and you all of a sudden miss out on opportunities. You come back and someone else was like trying to take your role. And so I do think that dynamic on how much leave is acceptable is really tough. And I wish it was more equal.
100%. I think there's this anxiety while you're on leave, which is really unfortunate, because there's so much other stuff going on. You're caring for your child, and birth in itself is such a physical, demanding process that moms need to recover from. Not to mention the craziness of breastfeeding, which personally I found maybe the hardest part of all this. Actually, is figuring that part out. And so I do think there's probably not enough like understanding if someone hasn't been a parent themselves around what moms go through. And then I think the part that also is tough is when you come back, they expect you to be running at 150% right off the bat, when in reality, you need to ease back in. You need to figure out your pumping schedule. You have to figure out what this new cadence of work life looks like with a really young child. Not to mention, no one is sleeping. And, I think if you're not sleeping, I think you're coming to work trying to grit it out and show up with positivity. And that's hard. I think when you're sleep deprived, it's really, everything becomes a little bit harder. So I think all of that.
How do you tell when you may be more in the red than the yellow? And what I mean by that is a lot of the folks that I think are hearing this, part of the reason why they want to tune in is because they feel like they're failing. They are in that, we'll call it the burnout stage. And, that we all can describe that as being quite personal. You can't just sort of do a checkbox and say, you're oversubscribed if this column is bigger than this other column. I think a lot of it has to do with how you kind of interface with work. But when either you've coached folks in your teams or your friends, or you maybe personally, are there times when you're like, I think there's something needs to change because I think I'm on the wrong path?
I know for me, it's when I'm not mentally present with my kids or my husband. Then, the sort of sacred time that I am spending with them, it's very important to me to be present and to be engaged. And so when I find myself, between when work ends and before they go to sleep, these really important couple hours as a family, I find myself on my phone the whole time, right? Or in my own thoughts, or my husband's, trying to talk to me about something after the kids have gone to bed and my head's clearly somewhere else, right? I mean, I can handle the spinning plates and kind of all the things in my own head, but when it starts to bleed into the relationships I have with the people I love, that's, I think, where I sort of check myself and go, something needs to change, because at the end of the day, these are the people that matter most, right? And so when I find myself in those, day after day, sort of not present in the moments I do have with my family, that's where I know there's something that I kind of need to adjust in terms of all the things I'm trying to take on.
When you find yourself kind of maybe living on that knife's edge and perhaps coming to that conclusion, something needs to change, what can you do? If you find yourself in the red, how do you get back into the yellow? I think what we're hearing is maybe the yellow is the North Star. There's never a green. But I think the question I have is, what have you done to make those corrections so that you can kind of get back to the proper prioritization and feel like you're back to yourself, you're back to balance, even though balance isn't what we're trying to achieve, but you're closer to that green state than the red state?
I'll key off the sort of a question at the beginning around how do you approach this all as a product manager. I think I just go back to, how do you think about making trade-off decisions when you're, trying to build a feature, right? You either can reduce scope, you can add resources, or you can, change the timeline. And so whatever those dimensions are of what's in your control to make the decisions around what needs to come off. So if I have to go through ruthless prioritization, maybe something needs to come off, or is there help I can get to speed things up, right? If you're going to do it the analogy of the product manager. So I think, kind of going through the exercise of saying something needs to either come off, I need additional help, or I need to be rethinking the things that I am doing and approach them differently. But I think you sort of have to take that mentality of ruthless prioritization or adjusting things at the edges in order to support the list of things that you do have on your plate.
I totally agree with the prioritization piece. What I find for myself is that stress is not usually caused by the amount of stuff going on in my life. I always have a lot of things going on in my life. It's really about my mental approach to it and how I'm viewing those things that I'm spending time on. So for example, if baby's waking up a lot of times in the night, I can wake up and be really frustrated by the fact that I'm like waking up in the night, or I can actually find joy in it and say, hey, like I'm spending time taking care of my child. And this is actually a joyful experience, even if it's 3 a.m. The same thing is true about work. It's like there's always stress at work. There's always things that are going wrong. But can you find joy? And can I find joy in growing and trying to get through the hardship? And so like, I really feel like, and I mean, Shirley said some of this too. It's about how can you laugh in the situations that are difficult and how can you find joy? So for me, I've actually found that most of the time I don't need to reprioritize my time. I actually just need to I need to change how I'm mentally approaching a situation and approach it from a perspective of how do I find joy? How do I make this fun? Why isn't it fun right now? Is it because of the people that I'm interacting with? Is it because I just haven't really taken a full perspective of this moment and why this moment is great and can be great? And how do I be grateful for the things around me versus blaming people around me? Those kinds of mental shifts actually have made a much bigger difference in my life than trying to reprioritize my time.
I often need to create hacks for myself to force it. If it's like leaving my phone outside of the room or like uninstalling Slack or closing my computer, like I have to do these really intentional things sometimes to make sure that I'm spending the time in the right place. And I think that's okay. Like if you can create these hacks and boundaries that brings you to the better outcome, then do that. And I also think typically, if you feel like you're not working on something that's valuable or you're not spending your time on something that's valuable, that's when burnout happens. And you can I'm a huge believer in you can do anything for a finite period of time when there's an end in sight. And so what I'll try and do is I'll try and understand, like, am I sprinting and what's the end? Okay, I can do that. Or am I just spending my time on stuff that is invaluable? Let's totally reset and figure that out because that's going to make me really frustrated.
I love that. I think the perspective, but also the decision around what you want to spend your time on, what you want to be excellent at, I think is so important. I'll give a small example. During my first year in my current role, my nanny took my daughter Ada to preschool and picked her up every single day. And, I think at the end of that school year, I had this moment where I went to go pick her up, and it was rare that I picked her up, and she was so excited that her mom was picking her up. And I remember feeling incredibly heartbroken, in that moment that, oh my gosh, like I haven't been here for pickup. And I know that's silly, but, to Anneka's point, maybe reframing, I just decided, hey, I think it'd be really great to get to know my daughter's school, get to know her teachers and her friends at school. And so this year I made a small change where I just made sure I'm doing drop off or pickup every day, one of those, or sometimes both, and figuring out how to make that work in my schedule and making sure I block time for it. And so there are kind of these macro moments where I think you just decide whether it's big or small, like what you want to really make high on your priority list, and just figure out what else needs to shift around to make that happen. So I'm sure working moms, working parents have these moments, but I just think instead of beating yourself up, I think you can take a moment to figure out, hey, what are the things that I truly want to be A+ at? And what are the things that I might want to pull in, like support or takeout or laundry help to make it all happen?
Yeah, I want to connect these points together. I feel like Annie noted that removing things and reprioritization is one of the key ways to get from red to yellow. And I think that makes sense. But I think that the notes that are being presented is, hey, ultimately, you want to prioritize joy. Find the things that you really want to do that will then pull on that time, and then ultimately figure out what you can remove. That increases joy, and it just allows that prioritization to feel far better, and reduces that burnout factor, even if you're working the same number of hours. I think that I find the same approach, that as I add things, I always check in, are the thing that I'm adding dramatically more fun than the things that I'm removing? And if the answer is yes, I keep doing it. And if the answer is no, then I, kind of reformat it. And I think that I start with the idea that there are too many things that I could be spending my time doing that will never fit. So my mentality is not, as Brianna said, trying to get it all to fit. My mentality is to reduce the amount of dissatisfaction of the things that I'm not prioritizing and increasing my joy. And maybe that's where I want to head. The question is, when I'm in a bad place, it's because the person that I'm dissatisfying more than anyone else is actually me. That I've, sacrificed, perhaps in your case, it's sleep or health or, time to watch your favorite episode of TV or, run on the treadmill or whatever your personal joy may come from. But how do you ensure that you are prioritizing you, not your units, but like yourself? Do you feel like you're doing a good job there? And have you worked towards making sure that that's on the list?
5 or 6 years ago, I went through an incredibly stressful time. And it wasn't because, again, nothing was actually happening on the personal front that was particularly stressful, but I was just stressed out all the time. I would wake up 3 times a week in the middle of the night, be awake from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m., recurring for 6-8 months, couldn't figure out a way out of it. And I eventually did figure out a way out of it, but it came down to just really looking at what was going on in my life. And to your point, Nikhyl, like why wasn't I finding joy in what I was doing? And why was this causing me so much stress that I literally, like, my life felt like it was falling apart? I had to do a lot of work. I had to do a lot of self-reflection on what is it that causes me stress and what is it that brings me joy, and how do I keep my cup a lot more full instead of running on empty constantly. And through that process of reflection, I came to the realization that the thing that causes me the most stress is not having control of my time. I can have a lot of stuff going on, but if I feel like my time is not in my control, then I start to spin out of control. And so once I understood that about myself, ever since then, I've been able to manage my stress so much better because I know that I just need to feel in control of my time. And for me, that means understanding, why am I spending my time the way I am? What are the things that I want and why? And if I have a really strong why behind everything I'm doing, professionally, personally, with my family, with my friends, then I can get comfortable and I can feel like I don't have any regrets that I'm spending my time at work and not at home, or I'm spending my time at home and not on some other professional endeavor. I'm spending time with my nuclear family instead of going and spending time with a bunch of friends. Those are the things that I can understand on that, and I can schedule and think about my time from this holistic perspective of, why do I want to spend my time the way that I do, and what is really going to bring me joy?
That comes to the question then of like saying no. I think I personally in my career have struggled with saying no, and I reflect on times where, I just got asked to go to the UK for work, and like, I don't actually want to do that. I don't want to be away from my daughter, but I found myself having a hard time saying no because I was like, oh, the business needs me. And it just took a second to be like, no, why don't I just say what I want? I don't want to go. Can someone else go instead of me? Is this really critical for the business? Turns out it's not. And so I think I like the concept of controlling your time and making sure you give yourself the space to say no, then to feel like you have that control and it's going to be okay.
I want to go back to these tricks that you referred to, the control over time, reprioritization. We mentioned outsourcing, which is a combination of finding the resources that can help support you beyond maybe your family and friends, but also maybe doing a careful examination of the things that don't necessarily drive joy or that are routine, and then finding a way to sort of disconnect you or your partner from those. Like that's a big piece for me, by the way, that I have a lot of, I have tremendous appreciation for my support structure, my wife in particular, who does a lot of the things around, a lot of the invisible work, which I just try not to make invisible. And I also, a friend of mine came up to me once and said, I can't believe that, that my wife is asking me to hire a housekeeper for 6 hours a day because I don't, she doesn't work. And I hire a housekeeper for, 10 hours, kind of all the way through the week almost, because I don't want my wife to feel like she can't find time for herself. But I don't need that because between the two of them, they manage the time, right? So I'm thinking kind of one level ahead to make sure that, my wife comes to me and says, hey, I want to go out to dinner with my friends. I move my calendar because it's such a rare event and how often it's sort of not reciprocated. So there's a balancing act that we all have to do when it comes to this outsourcing. I'm wondering, what are some other tips that the listeners here that can sort of pull down and take advantage of? Other ideas that you've been doing when you think about, especially as you've become moms and you've had a much more demanding time with kids, what are these sort of executive hacks?
I recently signed up for a service called Johanna, which is basically a personal assistant, on-demand personal assistant. I'm sure there are a lot of different versions of this out there, but back in the fall when we were hosting Thanksgiving for, 25 people, she was a huge help in basically getting all the rentals taken care of, the menu finalized. I mean, there were still things I had to do, but the fact that there was just sort of like someone going through and organizing and pushing forward something like an event that we were trying to plan with our family and extended families was very helpful. So researching swim classes for my son, I don't, there are things that just you got to be calling places and you got to be, and so I think it's been a really tremendous value add for me just in terms of being able to outsource some of those tasks that, can't necessarily fully complete, but they can at least do a lot of the legwork that makes my ability to then just get them over the line a lot less of an effort. So I found that to be a really valuable service so far.
I think we actually have help with the household administrative tasks, because that way my husband and I, have extra time to spend with each other and with the kids. The other thing that I feel very blessed to have is a really incredible nanny. We had to search long and hard and go through a couple of nanny departures to find her. And I think now that we do, we joke, but it's true. We plan our life around our nanny part. She loves her kids. I fully trust her. I try to give her raises every 6 months. My husband says, if she told us we needed to pay her 2 times as much, I would do it. And I think that could be true. I mean, I think she, oops. Microphone. She gives us so much leverage and she cares for our kids and we have nothing to worry about. And I think that lets us have peace of mind when we're at work. And we know that when we come back that we have happy kids, that the house is taken care of. And so I think that's really important to find people to join your village and give you leverage and make sure that you have that trust and support so that you can juggle it all.
Do you all vacation? And if you do, is it spontaneous? Is it planned? How do you think about vacation time as a way of break or respite, as a way of reducing kind of stress and burnout?
I was just smirking a little bit when you said vacation. The joke of once you have kids, they're just called family trips. And you just go other places to watch your children that are actually less convenient than being home. So I don't think we've had a full-on vacation since our son was born. However, what I found from a hack is to take a PTO day or 2 days where we're home and we have childcare, and I can actually go spend 2 days with my husband having a staycation, doing things in our area or by myself. Maybe not fully answering your question, but I've found the vacation opportunity of, when you do have children and you're fortunate enough to have, childcare outside of the home or someone coming to your home, that you can take advantage of those days, call those PTO days to take real time for yourself or with your partner. But otherwise, in my experience, they're mostly now just family trips.
I had this experience where, particularly in the pandemic, once it sort of started to become a little bit more permissible to travel, we used to travel, and everyone, when you are at work and you're like on PTO, using Annie's example, they want to know like, oh, did you go to some exotic location? And I'm like, oh, let's make sure we go to the beach, let's make sure we go to the mountains. Everyone's got that list. And then of course you've got those weeks in calendar if you've got school age kids. So you're always like, you and everyone else in your region is all traveling to the same location, and you're all now in a bit of a frenzy for resources, and everything's 3 times as much expensive. And I, would spend a lot of energy going on these trips, and I'd come back and I felt, maybe to use your note, Annie, that I was just sort of managing a different problem in a different location. And I didn't feel particularly rested. And what I started realizing is, well, actually, the goal of vacation is to produce rest for the family and allow them to sort of recharge so that you can kind of do the next sprint. And so I started to look at the calendar a bit like a set of sprints that take place. And I said, okay, well, you start out mid-January, and you go until maybe February late, when you kind of have a little bit of a break. And then you go to spring break, which is maybe 6 to 8, 10 weeks later. Then, of course, you have another 6, 8 weeks. And then you get hit the summer. Summer lasts 2, 3 months. And then, boy, there's that 10 weeks between Labor Day and Thanksgiving. And then a couple of months. And then you repeat. And I started realizing, like, what you really want to do is recharge batteries. And your example of like, maybe you don't travel when everyone else does. Maybe you use that to avoid getting sick, to make sure that you're enjoying the things that you enjoy. And frankly, for me, what was really a big breakthrough was crossing things off the list that I never can get to was the most therapeutic thing. And it sounds super weird, but I had my best week because I got through 77 things. My taxes are done and I feel great. Everyone's like, you are the weirdest dude that like has a vacation to do his tax. I'm like, no, because when I'm on vacation, I'm spending all my time worrying about not doing my taxes. So I just think that mentally everyone's wired differently in terms of where anxieties come from. And I'm a planner as a result. I plan those vacations months ahead. So I know these 6 weeks I'm going to go hard because I know I have a break. And that's my hack on my calendar and my mindset to sort of get through things.
We've started over the past couple of years, started to do different kinds of vacations. So often, like, I want to go, we both have friends that live outside the Bay Area in different places. My husband's family lives on the East Coast. I have extended family that lives on the East Coast as well. So we started to do a couple of things. One is go and take vacations where we can just go see our family and friends, and we'll do it on a whim. Like, we decided over MLK weekend in January to go visit some friends in Austin. So we did that, and it was really, really fun. But we've also started to do a thing where we will take our entire family on vacation with us. And so we will actually go places. And then, we get a benefit of, we have the grandparents there, we have some childcare, and we get to spend time with our family, and we get to go to a new place together. And that has been a really, really nice way for us to take vacation and travel and feel relaxed, especially now that we have a small baby.
Any additional things that you recommend for audience to do when it comes to keeping yourself in check, particularly when it comes to personal time? I think that there's a lot of things that we're doing to help the group or the household or the family. But, do all of you block time off to work out? Do all of you meditate? Do you get a chance to see your best friends that before you were a couple and connect? Or do you talk on the phone? What do you do to make sure you are important?
Yeah, I think so. running for me has always been two things, running and getting my nails done. I don't know. Those are like, Scott calls them my brie days. And I still have not figured out how to work out during the week and also prioritize time with my daughter and my husband. So TBD on that, but the weekend, it's very clear. And we've talked about it like Saturday and Sunday. I'm going to go for a run. So we talk about like, what's your plan for today? And I'm like, all right, I have a podcast I'm doing and I want to go for a run. And it's like literally like on the to-do list. And I'm like, okay. And tomorrow I want to get my nails done. And we both know that those are my things and it really helps me feel a lot better. And you have to plan for them. And it sounds like, I need to figure out the during the week thing, but as long as I have the weekend to do that stuff, I end up feeling a lot better.
I try to not think about 8 to 6 p.m. during the week as only work time and then scheduling personal time around that, but really looking at my schedule holistically and being okay with doing 1 hour in the day, especially if I'm working from home that day, going to on a walk, taking my son on a walk and going to the library and coming back. So basically looking really at my time in a fully integrated context, as opposed to trying to schedule to keep the daytime hours during the week for work only. And that's been really helpful for me. I think the pandemic has actually made that a lot easier and more acceptable than when we were all having to be in the office all the time. That's been a real blessing, is being able to more holistically look at a day and plan my days accordingly. And some days I don't have those times for sure because I'm super busy, but then there's some weeks that are a little bit lighter and I can do more personal stuff during the day as well, in addition to work.
I love that, Anneka. I'm going to steal that idea. The holistic view. It doesn't have to be 8 to 6. I think personally, I feel really lucky. My husband is so supportive and he holds me accountable almost in fitting in personal stuff. So he'll ask me, when's your next girls trip? He had the great idea of like, can you and your girlfriends, go book an amazing hotel in wine country for a night or two, because we have nanny help and it's no problem. And so, I think it's awesome if you have folks pushing you to also make time for yourself. It's hard to fit it all in.
As we wind up, I think that a lot of the listeners here are also thinking about transition, as we talked about last time. They're thinking about either internally opportunities that are bigger and more intense, or they're thinking about potentially, at the time of career, they're feeling a little bit, hamstrung by the growth of their current company or the opportunities that might be available with the market we have today. And the biggest concern they may have is it's just a bigger job and they're already feeling a little bit of a pinch. They feel like they're in the yellow. So, maybe summarizing some of the things we've talked about, but also just sort of what advice do you have for a fictitious leader who's looking at a bigger, harder job and they're worried that they're going to find themselves underwater, that they'll be burning out relatively quickly? What do you ask them to check in with or to test before they take that role, if this is a real worry that they have, that this is maybe not the role yet because of the demands on the time?
I think you really have to ask yourself get to the why of what's holding you back. I think if you're really energized about the opportunity, there's always a way to figure out how to make it work. Now, there may have to be sacrifices, right? You may have to sacrifice things like sleep or your time with family, or you may have to go through that reprioritization exercise to see what can come off the list in order to put this on. But I think if you want something and you're really energized by the idea and the opportunity, I think we're all very capable of sort of like finding a way to make it work. Now, if the hesitation comes more from a feeling of just general burnout or something with the opportunity that, isn't giving you energy, then I think that's when you really need to listen, because then you're just going to be making all these sacrifices, but not getting the reward of the work. So I'd really pressure test like the actual opportunity and the joy and the energy that it gives you. And if it's, all joy and all energy, then I think you can find a way to make it work, knowing you're going to have to make sacrifices. But if the joy isn't there, you don't have energy around it, and then you're still going to have to make these sacrifices, that's where I think you really lead to that feeling of burnout.
Annie, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think a very key part of making sure that that opportunity is going to be something that's energizing is really looking at the people that you're going to be working with. Because I tend to find that the most stressful times at work are when I'm having a lot of conflict with people and our values don't align, or there's so many issues like that. And having a team and knowing that your executive team is going to be really supportive of you. I mean, I'll share something very personal. Like last year I was going through a really tough time. My father passed away very suddenly in December. I was 20 weeks pregnant. And I was just I was 5 months into a new job being the chief product officer at Rubrik. It was really, really tough. I couldn't work more than a couple hours a day. I was just dealing with so many logistics and mourning, and also still going through feeling nauseous from my pregnancy. And it was a lot. And I was so grateful to have an executive team that was just fully there for me. Even though I was still new on the job, they were there to support me every step of the way. They did not mind that I was not working that hard for a couple of months. And I was about to go on maternity leave soon. That support system of the people I worked with, it made all the difference in the world. And really, the people that you work with matter a lot. You spend a lot of time with them. You're sacrificing the time with their family to be with these people. If these are not the people that you want to be spending time with, definitely walk away.
And when it comes to, I totally agree with people. And I think a lot of fear in taking the next job is I won't do a good job. The unknown unknowns, like, is there going to be something I'm not good at? And so just if you are worried about that, I think one, just being transparent about those gaps. If people know that they know and you're working on it, it's almost like it isn't an issue. And then two, how can you surround yourself with the people or resources to get support on those dimensions so that you feel like you can improve and do that next level job?
Maybe one last thought is that career is so long, and there's so many opportunities to grow and take that next big job. And so I often in conversations with folks that I mentor say, hey, it has to be worth it. You have to feel excited and energized. You have to feel really connected with the people that you're going to spend a lot of time with. And so if it's not this, don't fret, don't rush into something that's not quite right. There's so much opportunity over the course of your career, and there's no rush in it.
I think two things that I just add. One, about the people. Some of the calculus that one does is what's the culture and the partners and the peers going to look like. But some of the calculus that I do is what's the team under me going to look like. When I've talked to folks that are before and after in this question, the biggest difference is if they came in and they're supposed to build a team and do the work that needs to be done as though the team existed and learn the company and the culture, that is so much more than if it's I've got 4 people, 5 people who really do know what's going on and I'm supposed to bring us to the next level. You just change your time, and the emotional calculation is totally different. So don't just think about the company and this growth rate and the valuation and the expectations. Think about the people beside you, above you, and below you. Note one. Note two is the other thing that I oftentimes hear is that society describes startups as being this insane 24/7 environment, and the bigger, larger organizations as cushy gigs. Oh, they have the sort of espresso machine and they have the laundry. It must be really easy. A friend of mine from many, many years ago made the comment that that's actually more the opposite. And I said, well, that's interesting. Explain. And he's like, well, look, as a leader in a large company, you have global teams. So you travel a lot. Travel's really hard, especially when you have kids, especially when you have to support it. It's just hard. If you are up all the time because of a time zone, your schedule is completely wrecked. you're constantly in meetings. And then you're trying to squeeze your work in between that because you have so many people. Well, big companies have all those characteristics. If it's like a small company, there's no meetings. You can travel around, but it's not like you're meeting other employees. Your schedule is much more in your control because you're sort of setting the pace. And I would say to you that having worked in late stage for 10 years, my calendar is vastly different than when I was a startup. I was thinking about this recently. I'm like, oh yeah, there was that time when I could just do a 1 to 3 and I could just tell someone, yeah, I'm around that day. Now it's like, hey, in 6 months, I've got this 30-minute slot on a Saturday. Do you want that? I mean, it is that scheduled. And so I find that be very thoughtful on what's the demands of the time that you need to provide in the role that you're considering. Don't just use the simple, oh, you know what, it's a big job at a big company. I mean, it has these pluses and minuses. Really dig in on this question. Thank you for. I know there was a lot of great content, but not necessarily any magic bullets, which means we did it right. Because I don't think that this is an easy topic. There's so much great stuff that you folks shared. So I'm so grateful to be working with you and the Skip CPO group, and for your wisdom for both me and the listeners. I think it was a terrific conversation, and I hope we do it again and talk about another great big career topic. So I hope everyone has a great week.